Hey Al. I was thinking about doing a live video, but then um, I realized that my camera won't record in portrait right now, and live video seems to require that. So I just am making a normal video, and I'll just post it. Um, so I was just working on some writing and some video editing this week. Maggie and I, well, actually, it was Maggie's idea. She wanted to start a video series with me where we have conversations about whatever topic she picks. So she's picked these topics, these questions, and we're starting a little video series, and she has called it Conversations with Mama. It's really sweet. So it's a time for us to work on a project together and to have conversations that maybe we would have, maybe we wouldn't have, but we can have and share. And she's excited about it. So we're starting on that. And I was editing our video today, and I was just feeling really proud of her. It was sort of like this little claim, kind of like this reclamation of hers. Like, I want my voice to be heard. I have something to say, and I want to share it. And so my yoga class this morning was canceled because it's a class for seniors, and when there's a couple of flakes on the ground, they don't want to go outside, which I get. So we canceled yoga this morning, and I've been working on the editing of the video, and it's so wonderful to see her. Even from the beginning of the video to the end, there is movement and growth in the way that she carries herself. So she's very self-conscious at first, and she's kind of like throwing her head up and like embarrassed and covering her face. And then by the end, she's looking at the camera and she says, "So next week," and she talks about what's coming down the pike for our next video. So it's a really sweet time to be working on the editing and looking at her. And it just got me to thinking, like, that resistance that she is engaging in there, that resistance to being voiceless or erased as a girl. I read an article that talked about that around the year of fourth grade is when girls start to stop raising their hands and kind of take a back seat to the voices of the boys in the classroom. And I've even seen that in my own teaching at different times, where girls will give their notes to a boy so he can raise his hand and give the answer. He doesn't have the answer in his notes. She does, and she passes her note to him so that he can have his voice be amplified. But really, it's her voice. So she's being silenced and giving up her voice to him, which is crazy. But I have witnessed that in my years of teaching. So I've just been thinking about erasure and erasure even as death and that concept, and sort of like a bell hooks type of analysis, or Audre Lorde talking about silence as death. So I've been thinking about that. And another thing that sort of connected for me in my mind was this week I was in church in Germantown at St. Luke's, and the priest talked about a man who I think he mentioned might have been homeless or is homeless. Certainly that he was, when he had first started attending the church, he was actively addicted. And that, he wasn't necessarily the most warmly welcomed, or maybe he was welcomed, but there was a little bit of a scary element with him being there, and some erratic behavior and things like that. But he kept coming, and they kept, doing their best to welcome him there into the church. And they had really seen a transformation of this man over the several years that he's been a member or an attending person at the church. And then the priest did something which I have never really seen before. He read the words of this man. I guess he had gotten the permission of this man, who is a poet, apparently, and he read poetry from the pulpit. He amplified the voice of this man, and the poem was beautiful. It was beautiful. And he read it twice, and he really emphasized, he said, "I'm going to read it again. I really want you to listen to his voice, listen to his words." And I felt so moved by the idea that in that position of power, this priest was intentionally choosing to amplify the voice of someone really very opposite him in terms of power in that setting. And that as an act of resistance, resisting the erasure. So, thinking of a homeless, a drug-addicted man coming into church, and most of us have witnessed that and how they get treated when they come in. Maybe no one sits next to them, or we shush them or put them in a corner or things like that. And to actually bring his voice into the sermonic moment, into the pulpit, into the position of teaching, was so radically beautiful and powerful to me. So I've been reflecting on that, and I wanted to share with you just some words from Bell Hooks, again with this All About Love book, which I come back to again and again, and just thinking about the connection between erasure and death. And Bell Hooks here is really critiquing our societal fascination and obsession with death, our sort of pursuit of death even. And she links that to a culture of domination, being one that pursues death or really loves death more than it loves life. And if love is what makes life meaningful, those two things would be antithetical. You can't be obsessed with death and the pursuit of it and all of its sort of tributaries, and love life and love. Those two things don't go together. So I'll read this. This is from chapter 11, and it's called Loss, Loving into Life and Death. And I'll read some of it. Love makes us feel more alive. Living in a state of lovelessness, we feel we might as well be dead. Everything within us is silent and still. We are unmoved. Soul murder is the term psychoanalysts use to describe this state of living death. It echoes the biblical declaration that anyone who does not know love is still in death. Cultures of domination court death. Hence, the ongoing fascination with violence, the false insistence that it is natural for the strong to prey upon the weak, for the more powerful to prey upon the powerless. In our culture, the worship of death is so intense it stands in the way of love. On his deathbed, Erich Fromm asked a beloved friend why we prefer love of death to love of life, and why the human race prefers necrophilia to biophilia. Coming from Fromm, this question was merely rhetorical, as he had spent his life explaining our cultural failure to fully embrace the reality that love gives life meaning. Unlike love, death will touch us all at some point in our lives. We will witness the death of others, or we will witness our own dying, even if it's just in that brief instance when life is fading away. Living with lovelessness is not a problem we openly and readily complain about. Yet the reality that we will all die generates tremendous concern, fear, and worry. It may very well be that the worship of death, indicated by the constant spectacles of dying we watch on television screens daily, is one way our culture tries to still that fear, to conquer it, and to make us comfortable. Writing about the meaning of death in contemporary culture, Thomas Merton explains, psychoanalysis has taught us something about the death wish that pervades the modern world. We discover our affluent society to be profoundly addicted to the love of death. In such a society, though much may officially be said about human values, whenever there is in fact a choice between the living and the dead, between men and money, or men and power, or men and bombs, the choice will always be for death. For death is the end or goal of life. Our cultural obsession with death consumes energy that could be given to the art of loving. The worship of death is a central component of patriarchal thinking, whether expressed by women or men. Visionary theologians see the failure of religion as one reason our culture remains death-centered. In his work, Original Blessing, Matthew Fox explains, Western civilization has preferred love of death to love of life to the very extent that its religious traditions have preferred redemption to creation, sin to ecstasy, and individual introspection to cosmic awareness and appreciation. For the most part, patriarchal perspectives have shaped religious teaching and practice. Recently, there has been a turning away from these teachings toward a creation-grounded spirituality that is life-affirming. Fox calls this the via positiva. Without this solid grounding in creation's powers, we become bored, violent people. We become necrophiliacs in love with death and the powers and principalities of death. We move away from this worship of death by challenging patriarchy, creating peace, working for justice, and embracing a love ethic. Ironically, the worship of death as a strategy for coping with our underlying fear of death's power does not truly give us solace. It is deeply anxiety-producing. The more we watch spectacles of meaningless death or random violence and cruelty, the more afraid we become in our daily lives. We cannot embrace the stranger with love, for we fear the stranger. We believe the stranger is a messenger of death who wants our life. This irrational fear is an expression of madness if we think of madness as meaning we are out of touch with reality. Even though we are more likely to be hurt by someone we know than a stranger, our fear is directed toward the unknown and the unfamiliar. That fear brings with it intense paranoia, constant obsession with safety. The number of gated communities in our nation is but one example of the obsession with safety. With guards at the gate, individuals still have bars and elaborate internal security systems. Americans spend more than $30 billion a year on security. When I have stayed with friends in these communities and inquired as to whether all the security is in response to an actual danger, I am told, not really. That it is the fear of threat rather than a real threat that is the catalyst for an obsession with safety that borders on madness. Culturally, we bear witness to this madness every day. We can all tell endless stories of how it makes itself known in everyday life. For example, an adult white male answers the door when a young Asian male rings the bell. We live in a culture where, without responding to any gesture of aggression or hostility on the part of the stranger who is simply lost and trying to find the correct address, the white male shoots him, believing he is protecting his life and his property. This is an everyday example of madness. The person who is really the threat here is the homeowner who has been so well socialized by the thinking of white supremacy, of capitalism, of patriarchy, that he can no longer respond rationally. White supremacy has taught him that all people of color are threats, irrespective of their behavior. Capitalism has taught him that at all costs his property can and must be protected. Patriarchy has taught him that his masculinity has to be proved by the willingness to conquer fear through aggression, that it would be unmanly to ask questions before taking action. Mass media then brings us the news of this in a newspeak manner that almost sounds jocular and celebratory, as though no tragedy has happened, as though the sacrifice of a young life was necessary to uphold property values and white patriarchal honor. Viewers are encouraged to feel sympathy for the white male homeowner who made a mistake. The fact that this mistake led to the violent death of an innocent young man does not register. The narrative is worded in a manner that encourages viewers to identify with the one who made the mistake by doing what we are led to feel we might all do to protect our property at all cost from any sense of perceived threat. This is what the worship of death looks like. So I found that really powerful, a little bit long, thanks for bearing with it, but just a really powerful read, and I hope it sparks some conversation in your day today. Have a good one.